Ladies and gentlemen, we are live. Will you just look at it? Mr. David Icke is next to me. Really excited for this opportunity. This has been something that I've been working on for years, and Mr. Icke is extremely busy, so this opportunity is fantastic. And we're going to talk today about the Illuminati Matrix and the serpent, the gods that overlook the pyramid of reality, the biggest secret. Infinite love is the only truth. Everything else is illusion. Now, today's guest needs no introduction. This individual has shattered the paradigm of millions and broken the firewalls of control that binds the minds in the Matrix. This person is so controversial, the entire country of Australia banned him from entering their borders. Researcher, lecturer, wizard of words, footballer, broadcaster, author of over 24 books, thought expansion expert, Mr. David Icke. Now, today we are going to be discussing the clandestine control grid of the Matrix through vibrational frequencies, visible light and technology, even 5G. The Anunnaki, are they the real Illuminati? The Watchers, are they the reptilian? Are they the real shapeshifters? We're going to be connecting ancient scriptures, cuneiform tablets, petroglyphs that have been etched in stone from around the world and suppressed knowledge you have the right to know. Real quick, I want to let you know, in a world of big data spies, lists, and databases, would you like to be able to research the web and do it anonymously? Would you like to research news without algos that decide what you should see based upon your information research? Check out the Ultimate VPN virtual private network, virtualshield.com/Leak Project. They have deep discounts for the next 24 hours for Leak Project listeners. You have the right to keep your information to yourself for about the price of a soda per month. Check it out, virtualshield.com/Leak Project. Mr. Icke, you have done a fantastic job uncovering the Babylonian Brotherhood, the compartmentalization of the planet through bloodlines, DNA, big business, politics, and governments. People have heard bits and pieces of who you are through the mainstream media that loves to control the narrative. However, with that said, I would like to know more about you from you. I've been following your work now for years. You expanded my mind to the point of shattering my religious beliefs about, I would say, 13 years ago. And it was very hard on me at that time. It was actually very depressing for a while. And once I got out of that, I realized, oh my goodness, I am so much more than I used to think that I was. The world is so much more amazing. And it's also a lot darker on the other side of the spectrum. But then when you wrote the book, everything, Infinite Love is the Only Truth, Everything Else is Illusion, that took me from a very dark side after I read The Biggest Secret, thinking everything is doom and gloom, to thinking, you know what, we have a chance, we have an opportunity, we are light, and we can persevere. So first of all, thank you so much for coming on the program. How the heck are you? And I've got David on mute here, so he has to unmute it every time.
I turn myself on now, do I?
You're good to go.
I haven't been turned on for a long time. I have had quite a journey, to say the least, over the last 30 years. And, it started out when some very strange things were happening to me when I was a national television presenter for the BBC and a national spokesman for the British Green Party. And some very paranormal things started to happen. Long story short, I ended up visiting a psychic just to see if she would pick up. I'd never been to one before. Whether she would pick up what the hell was happening around me. And she appeared to, and told me I was going to go out on a world stage and reveal great secrets. And, people will, often listen to that and say, oh, a load of rubbish, psychics, oh, a load of rubbish. But everything I was told at that time, nearly 30 years ago, has happened or is happening in detail. So they have to explain that. And the explanation is that we live in a reality that is fundamentally different to the one we think we're experiencing. I mean, people talk about, things being far out. Well, I'm sitting on a chair now that isn't solid. I have walls surrounding me that are not solid, as quantum physics has shown. It's an illusion. It's a holographic illusion. And we are interacting with reality in the very same way, in principle, as a computer interacts with Wi-Fi. We are interacting with a field of possibility and probability, and we are manifesting that as a reality around us. Now, there's the, if you like, the collective reality, like the backdrop reality. So we look out of a window, we all see the same car going past. But how we impact upon that reality and how it impacts upon us comes down to our state of perception. Because we're dealing with a quantum field, like a cosmic Wi-Fi field of possibility and probability, we are choosing, though most of people don't realize it because it's kept from us, we are choosing what probabilities and possibilities we decode, like the computer decodes Wi-Fi, from this quantum field of possibility and probability. And what's doing the choosing is our perceptual state. Because this is why someone who sees themselves as little me, I have no power, lives a life experience that confirms to them that they are little me and have no power. This is why certain things happen to some people and other things happen to others. Perception. If you have a perception of little me, everything is a frequency. Everything is a band of frequency. Every thought is a frequency. Every emotion is a frequency. And thus, if your perceptual state is I have no power, and you're constantly looking up for someone else to control your life or dictate to you or tell you what to do, tell you what to think, that represents a very, very narrow band and low band of frequency. And so you are going to interact with the quantum field of possibility and probability, cosmic Wi-Fi, within that band of frequency that represents your perceptual state. And therefore, what you're going to manifest as experiences are going to be within that perceptual state. Thus, you are going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy in terms of what you believe you are. You will experience yourself as being. When you start to change your self-identity from little me to infinite me, to come to the realization that we are not our body, we are not our labels, they are just vehicles for experience. In terms of labels, they are an experience. What we are points of attention within an infinite state of consciousness, awareness. And we can be that awareness in its entirety, or we can be a myopic point of attention that believes it's little me and has no power. I am someone, that I work on the checkout in the store, that's who I am and nothing more. And therefore, where this is leading is that the stadium on which human life is played out, and from that all experience comes, is the stadium of perception. What you believe, you perceive. What you perceive, you experience. Or what you perceive, you believe, and what you believe, you experience. And when I've spent, this last 30 years uncovering this global conspiracy to enslave humanity in its entirety and totality, because that's the idea, it's been very clear for a very long time that the whole foundation of that control is control of human perception. And human perception comes from what? It comes from information received. Thus, you control information received. You are going to a very, very large extent dictate perception. And from that perception, through the process I'm talking about, you're actually going to dictate collective experience and individual experience. And therefore, where you now see this vast and increasing by the day war of censorship and suppression of information that's challenging the official narrative, what you're looking at is this war on perception playing out. Because as the alternative media in all its many and various forms has expressed itself more and more in recent times, not least through the internet, it has been a source of alternative ways of looking at the world. It's been a source of alternative information about the world. And what that means is it's been another source of information from which people can form their perceptions. And if you want to program perception, you must control information received. And that's what's happening now with your Facebooks and your Googles and your Amazons, etc. The censorship is there because they need to hijack and control information received. And where this is going, and where this is planned to go, and as we get into the technological side of this, that's all very much at the forefront of it, is to create a situation very much described by George Orwell in 1984, where people do not receive any information whatsoever, anytime, anywhere, that is not the official narrative. And they're the stepping stones we're taking now with this gathering censorship. And the reason for it is that this cause and effect process of control information, control perception, dictate experience, that is the whole foundation of human control. And so we need to take our perceptions back. And that means coming to our own conclusions and not allowing us to be like a computer terminal downloading perceptions from an external source, i.e. the establishment sources that dominate information. I'll turn my microphone off and then.
Great, thank you. And when we were talking before, folks, I just want you to know David is having some gremlins on his end with the computer, so he can't even see himself. And David, you look great, but you asked me before when we were talking if you could maybe just move the camera back an inch or two, because before it had your whole body and your whole head in there, and then when you were moving up a little bit, it just the very top part, you know, it was missing your hair part. Perfect. All right. So I would like to talk about this quantum computer that it seems like we are in a sense. When you look at quantum physics and you look at how nothing is solid, and they take something underneath a microscope and they can't get to that finite solid point because it keeps coming in and out of existence. When you look at fractals and DNA possibly being dual binary code, the electric universe, it all seems to be as if we're in some type of simulated reality. And then I think to myself, just as an example for people to use as a reference, are there 100 smoking men around a table that have the blueprint to the machine, and they're able to say, okay, on this date, we know what's going to happen because of all these, it's like the universal algorithm, I guess we can call it. And then they decide what gets out and when it gets out, and then they feed off of it. So I'm just going to call them the MFers, the money funders, those that love us so much. They have our best interest at heart, obviously. So with that being said, you've done so much research in the realms of shape-shifting and vibrational frequencies. And I know we only see 0.01% of the electromagnetic light spectrum, so they can come in and out of these dimensions. Like, do you think that they've always been there, or do you feel that they hijacked who we were at one point and have genetically manipulated us throughout the years to just continue to feed off of us?
My feeling is that humanity was hijacked, and that there has been genetic manipulation, which has led to this situation. It's one of the reasons that the truth doesn't come out easily is because there is a lot of background knowledge necessary before the apparently ridiculous takes on a very credible light. So, first of all, what is reality? What is this reality? What I would say, and you know, I'm not alone in this at all, even among mainstream scientists, a lot more now, because as you will know, over the last few years, a lot of mainstream scientists have come out and said, well, it does look like we live in some kind of simulation. Well, how does this work? Well, again, if we go back to the computer Wi-Fi analogy, going way back into the 1990s, I was calling the body a biological computer, because the base form of this reality and the base form of the body, the base form of everything within it, is waveform information. Think Wi-Fi again, waveform information. If there was Wi-Fi in this room now, and I was talking to someone who know nothing about computers and nothing at all, and I said to them, in this room is a field of information, radiation information, vibrating information, which you can tap into, and someone in South Africa or Australia or America can tap into the same field, and they can experience a worldwide reality. People who knew nothing about computers would say that was crazy, ridiculous. They'd say things like, well, where is it? I can't see it. Where is this field? But you say the same thing now to people who are well aware of Wi-Fi and computers, and they will say, oh yeah, Wi-Fi, computers, yeah, I understand that. And the only difference between that's ridiculous, that's crazy, where is it? And yeah, I understand that, yeah. The only difference between the two is knowledge. Because people now know about computers and Wi-Fi, just explaining that there's something in the unseen called Wi-Fi, which then you manifest on the screen as a completely different reality, that is okay, because they understand it. Well, our reality is just the same. In principle. I mean, one of the things that's very clear is that this technological smart reality that's unfolding around us is actually a technological plagiarism almost, copy of the very reality we're basically experiencing. So take the body to be a biological computer, which is interacting with these cosmic Wi-Fi fields of information, which have encoded into them constructs, which is why we all see and experience the apparently same reality. But the foundation of it is Wi-Fi. It's waveform. And if you look at what the five senses do, they take waveform information, they turn it into electrical information. They then communicate it to the brain, which decodes it into digital holographic information, which is the world that appears to be outside of us, but is actually inside of us. Just like, you know, the World Wide Web is inside the computer, but we see the manifestation of it on the screen, and it appears to be external, but it's actually inside the computer that decoding process is going on. It's the same with us. So if you think of the ear is picking up waveform sound waves, turns them into electrical information, communicates them to the brain, which then turns them into the sounds that we think we're hearing. It's the same with sight and all the senses. So basically what we're doing is receiving waveform information, decoding that into its digital holographic form, and experiencing what appears to be an external world, but is actually in here. So if you then look at computer games or virtual reality games, what is happening there? People put the gloves on, they put the the goggles on, the headsets, they put the audio on. And what's happening is the game, the virtual reality game or whatever, is feeding via these connections information to the five senses. And what these games are doing is hacking in to the very same processes of decoding through which we manifest this reality we call the world. It's hacking in to our decoding processes. And it can seem incredibly real. You see people playing these games and experiencing these virtual reality technologies, and they are reacting as if they're real. So what this matrix is, I would say, and I think this is why, this is where a lot of the genetic manipulation, which is talked about in terms of sons of God who interbred with the daughters of men and all this stuff, which you find in every culture, not just the Bible. We have been manipulated as a human race to decode basically a fake information source. So we were experiencing a reality before. This goes back thousands of years very clearly as we perceive time, another illusion. And we were therefore experiencing a reality from that information. But just as a virtual reality game hacks into the decoding processes of the body, so this matrix, this fake reality, which we are now, I suggest, experiencing, just like in so many ways the Matrix from the Matrix movies.
I got to jump in on that real quick, David.
Let me just turn you on. Turn me.
Just one quick question on that. How did we get stuck in here?
If you are decoding information and it's a particular reality, and then you start to decode different information, you decode a different reality. But basically, it's the same experience. It's just a completely different reality now. And, you know, this genetic manipulation, I say, actually tuned us in to this fake reality. We operate, you mentioned it already, people look out into the world as they perceive it, and they think that they're looking and seeing everything in the space that they're looking at. What we see when we look around is a fraction, a laughable fraction of what exists in that space. According to mainstream science, the electromagnetic spectrum, which is far more than we can see, is 0.005% of what exists in the universe. Some say it's a bit more, but not much. And visible light, which is the only band of frequency that we can actually see, everything we see is within this band of frequency, is a smear of the 0.005%. So we are looking out and experience what we think is an expansive world, when actually it's a band of frequency so tiny, it's hysterical, really. And I suggest, from my research over these years and decades, that that is not an accident. It's design. If you want to hold people in perceptual servitude, then you want to keep them in as narrow band of perceptual potential as you possibly can. Because the more expansive we are in terms of what we can perceive, the more reasons there will be to question where we are, who we are, and what the hell's going on. You want people in this myopia. And I say that this simulation, in part, is, or more than part, is actually doing that to us. It's giving us a very narrow band of reality. If we could see beyond, think of firewalls, think of the Chinese computer system, where they firewall off great swathes of the internet so people in China can't access them. That's basically what this simulation does. It firewalls us off, if we fall for it, from the rest of reality beyond it, which is infinity beyond it. And therefore we get stuck in this myopic perceptual bubble, thinking that it's something more than it is. And when you start to wake up, people say wake up, people are waking up. What does that mean? It means you start to let your mind expand, your sense of the possible expand, so that eventually it breaches the walls of this perceptual prison. And at that point, you start to perceive things, you start to perceive the prison in a very, very different light. You start to question it, you start to see things, you start to observe things that you weren't seeing before, because instead of being in the simulation and of the simulation, you are in the simulation in terms of the body, but your perceptions have now expanded beyond the simulation. Now you have another point of reference, and you start to see the world in a completely different way. And the more you allow your mind to expand and your consciousness to expand into these realms beyond the simulation, the more blatant and obvious the simulation and how it works becomes. And this is what they're terrified of. This is why they have to control information, because they need to keep us in a knowledge prison, which becomes a perceptual prison. Otherwise, we'd suss what's going on. And the other thing, of course, is you come into the world, you don't stay here that long by our perception of time, and you're out. The idea is to get them in, exploit them and get them out and get another lot in, and let none of them stay around for long enough or have access to information expanded enough to realize where they are, what they are, and what they're actually experiencing. And this is why, again, through the ages, since this hijack began, the people, that authority, whatever era, whatever culture, the people that authority are most terrified of are the seers and the shamans and the people who can have access to another reality, to therefore give a different fix on this reality. They're the ones that they're terrified of. And that's why when the empires of Europe, dominated by the British Empire, went out and colonized the world, they absolutely targeted the shamans and the carriers of the ancient knowledge and the people who were out there beyond the simulation, who could see beyond the prison, if you like. They're the ones that they're terrified of, and they're still targeting them today. I'll turn myself off a sec. You can speak.
Now, I just got back from a trip in Moab, Utah, and there are these petroglyphs out there that show these cataclysmic events that took place 1,300 years ago, where there was a huge solar flare, probably 10 times out of a Carrington event that took people back to the Stone Ages. But it also shows these petroglyphs that look robotic in nature, some that look as if like a mantis type being. And you've gotten into the reptilians quite a bit, but have you ever looked into other types of beings? Have you heard about the ant people that saved the Navajo? And could there be good and bad factions of these Anunnaki? I'm wondering if the Anunnaki and these ant beings are one and of the same. And I just want to add one more thing to this. There is a petroglyph in Utah, the ancient petroglyph, that shows a giant mantis looking being. And it looks eerily similar to what I feel that I saw when I was just a baby. And I can still remember it like it was yesterday. And I was in my crib, and I've confirmed this with my parents, the room. Like, I didn't confirm that what I saw in the room, but I confirmed the room with my parents by describing what it looked like. And make a long story short, I moved out of that place before I was 2 years old. So I know I was under 2 when I saw these things. But then I've seen other places that, like in a place called Sankawi, New Mexico, that looks like it could be over 10,000 years old, where these caverns were built into the mountainside. Reminds me of like an ant farm. So I'm thinking to myself, are the ant beings the Anunnaki, and are the Anunnaki the shapeshifters, the reptilians? Are they all one and of the same, but there's like different factions? I know that's a lot. That's a huge question, but I know you can keep up.
Well, it's real simple, really, when you break it down, because it looks so complex. The world looks so complex. Everything looks so complex, but a lot of it, the complexity is there so that we don't see the simple truths behind it. So let's bring a simple truth in this question. I've just described that how we can see a tiny, tiny, laughable fraction of frequency, and that's what we call the world. Look at the diversity of form within that narrow band of frequency. Look at the diversity of form in the human race. Look at the diversity of form in the animal kingdom, the insect kingdom, the kingdom of nature. Look at the extraordinary diversity. It's amazing. And it's a tiny, tiny band of frequency that we are perceiving. So now imagine what exists in terms of diversity beyond the walls of this visible light smear of reality. I mean, it's almost incomprehensible. And when people like me talk of non-human entities manipulating human society, it's testament to the scale and depth and profoundness of human perceptual programming that people think it's hilarious. When actually, when you look at the possibility for different forms and expressions of life within infinity, it's absolutely obvious that infinite different forms of non-human life exist. Look at the night sky, for goodness sake. And you're looking in the night sky with that blaze of lights at a tiny fraction of the Milky Way galaxy. Never mind the universe, never mind infinity beyond the universe, because the universe is only one reality within infinity. So where you're describing these different forms of life, people will say, if they heard you say that for the first time, that's crazy, man. But actually, it's blatantly obvious that all forms of life are possible. And then you go to the next stage, which is all forms of perception and motivation are possible. And therefore, you don't just have this potentially infinite range of different forms that consciousness can experience. You have this infinite range of the attitudes, mentality, motivations of that potential infinity of form. So you're going to have non-human forms, whether they take a reptilian form or a what they call the greys, people call the ant people, or these other different forms of non-human, quote, intelligent life. You're going to have the whole range of possibility in terms of benevolence to malevolence. What I'm exposing in terms of this reptilian and other group, because it's not just reptilian, they seem to be the dominant one, is a malevolent expression of that form. A malevolent expression that wants to control and have control over. So that's why this matrix has been visited upon us to, again, hold us in a perceptual prison, believing the fake reality is real, to keep us in a state of control. And what we're seeing now is the simulation expressing that control in more and more extreme forms by the introduction of technology, 5G, smart technology, smart grids, smart cities, and all these things, which are basically taking the foundation way the simulation works and bringing it down to a level of technology where the technology and the technological grids they're putting into place are technological, if you like, mirrors or copies of the simulation itself. And so that's the next stage in squeezing human perception into an even more myopic state. Because the plan is, and I've been warning about this for a very long time now, to connect the human brain to artificial intelligence. So artificial intelligence becomes human perception. This is being openly talked about now by people like Ray Kurzweil, the Google executive and so-called futurist. Very strange bloke indeed, I would suggest, and so many other people, that by 2030, humanity will be starting to be connected to artificial intelligence. And that, as in the words of Kurzweil, that artificial intelligence becomes more and more, if you like, intelligent than humans are, as he would put it, then more and more of AI will be dictating human perception and less of what we now call human consciousness, until the human consciousness is basically negligible and we become computer expressions literally on an AI internet. Now, this is not me sitting in a darkened room concluding this. This is what these people are now saying. And the reason they're saying it is they are seeking to sell us in their sales pitch the idea that being connected to artificial intelligence will make us superhuman. It's not about making us superhuman, it's making us post-human. That's what this is all about. And what's been happening is there has been a process of getting people addicted to this smart technology that they hold, then moving on to getting technology on the body, the smart watches and the Bluetooth and all the Google Glass and all this stuff, and then to move to where they've been aiming all along, which is now happening, to in the body, implantable technology, which will then connect us to AI. And at that point, we are not even then, as human consciousness, interacting with the matrix and having some kind of chance of concluding and sussing what the heck's going on, despite all the perceptual programming that goes on from cradle to grave. With human consciousness, you still have the potential to expand beyond the matrix and see the matrix for what it is. This next stage is to dispense with human consciousness altogether and basically turn us into terminals of AI. And to make this grid work, to make it operate, make it possible, they have to have communicative power of 5G or higher. And this is why 5G, these millimeter wave communication systems, are being introduced while the system openly accepts there has been no independent testing. There were, whether you saw this a few weeks ago, there were telecommunication industry representatives on Capitol Hill being questioned about this. And in one particular exchange, they were asked, how much money has the industry spent on testing the safety of 5G? And the answer was nothing. And then you saw the presentation some years ago by the head of the Federal Communications Commission that's supposed to protect us from the telecommunications industry, where he was not only accepting that they weren't going to wait for testing and research because there's too much money to be made, in effect, that they were just going to roll it out. They weren't going to wait for regulation, but would slow it down. And he was bragging about this. Now, the reason that 5G is not being independently tested, because if it was, then it would never be allowed to be played out. This is weapon grade technology. This is a weapon. And part of the weapon is to grasp control of the human mind and to operate as a vehicle for this AI to take over human society. And we have, of course, seen scientists, many scientists. Stephen Hawking, the late Stephen Hawking was one. And we've seen people like Elon Musk saying that this AI plan could be the end of humanity. Well, the end of humanity as we know it is exactly what it's planned to be. And I would take Elon Musk more seriously if he didn't then go away, having said connecting to humanity to AI could be the end of humanity, and launch a company to connect the human brain to artificial intelligence and to put up satellites through his SpaceX operation that are there to beam Wi-Fi 5G at the Earth, so that there is nowhere on Earth that anyone can escape from it. This is the next stage of the simulation, bringing it absolutely down to finally absorb, assimilate what up to this point has been what we call human consciousness. So this has been a step-by-step process, and it had to get to this point because it's so far out, it's so extraordinary, it's so ridiculous, that until it was in people's faces, they would never accept it, or most people wouldn't. So we're in a time now that is extremely dangerous because they're closing in on the end game, but also brims over with potential to put a spanner in this works, because people are increasingly finding it more and more difficult, still not the majority, but more and more, to go into denial about the way the world's going and how the world's changing and for what reason.
I would like to talk about 5G a little bit more in detail now. I've been doing a lot of research on the actual frequencies that they use, and some of these frequencies are in the 30 gigahertz range, which is 10 times the level of a microwave. So you're up there in the millimeter range, and there's a lot of different applications that this 5G, fifth generation communication is supposed to offer. Now, I've also heard things that 5G is going to be able to decipher whether somebody is extraterrestrial or hybrid or not. There's a lot of information and I'm sure disinformation out about 5G. Now, the technical stuff I can read about. I can look at the white papers. I do know that Elon Musk recently did an FCC request for launching of thousands of satellites in very low orbit, extremely high levels. I mean, the gigahertz range is insane, and they're wanting to use like a K-band. It's either V-band or K-band or both. So very interesting. Now, with the satellites and all the other stuff that we're talking about, let me just give you a prime example. My phone here, if it's not on airplane mode and it's in my pocket, I've got an EMF detector I can put next to it, and this thing's pinging off of cell towers, and I'll get more EMF radiation on this phone than I would if I was standing next to a cell tower, at least based upon the projections around the 850 megahertz. Now, if I'm standing right next to a cell tower where the antenna is, that's a different story. But people are radiating themselves with their phones, and they don't even realize it. Now, when they're moving up to 5G, that's a whole other level. That's in the millimeter range. So Do you think that once they activate 5G, that they will be able to also influence the emotions of entire towns or entire areas based upon the frequencies?
I've been writing about that for a long time. That's exactly what they can do now, but with 5G, we'll be able to do on a much more extreme scale. Let's just look at some of the things this frequency band of 5G is already used for. It's used by the American military to scatter crowds of protesters, because they send out a frequency in this range, and it gives people the feeling that their skin is on fire, and they scatter. That's the range that we're talking about. It's a weapon. And the reason that people feel that sensation in the skin is that the skin, indeed the entire body, is an antenna. We are interacting with the cosmic Wi-Fi. We are an antenna. DNA is a receiver transmitter of information. And you can change DNA by the information it decodes and receives, because that decoding changes it. And when people have, talked about genetic manipulation, and they talk about sons of God who interbred with the daughters of men, I say, I'm not saying that didn't happen at all, but I say that's overwhelmingly symbolic. The human form and the way the human form receives and transmits has been manipulated en masse in the past, I say, by this same process. If you can broadcast on the frequency band that DNA receives and transmits on, then you can change DNA. You can change DNA and the way that DNA transmits and receives. So you can, for instance, be receiving and transmitting, as a simple analogy, radio station A, and then your DNA can be manipulated externally in the way that I'm talking about through frequency, which tunes it to something else. Now it's receiving and transmitting with radio or TV B. Now, because of the information received, the perception of reality is changed in the receiver observer. And so this 5G is designed to, with the AI connection, to completely hijack human perception, human thought, human emotion, human reaction, human response, all of it. This is where we're going. And we have all these diversions going on so that we're looking the other way and don't look at this. I mean, even within the 5G, you have the diversion that you will be able to download a movie in seconds. Oh my God, that's fantastic, isn't it? I lose my mind. I lose my ability to think. I lose my uniqueness. I become a clone of some external technological force. But my God, who cares? I can download a movie in a few seconds. It's madness. And you notice how little there is about 5G in the mainstream media, because the idea is to have this as a fait accompli before the full consequences of it become clear. And consequences of it will become clear in physical consequences because of the power of 5G. I mean, the body organism is, as I said earlier, its base form is a waveform radiation information field. If you're this is why Wi-Fi and other forms, lower forms compared with 5G of technological transmissions are affecting people mentally, emotionally, and physically. That's why people that work with this technology have more prevalence for certain cancers than the rest of the population. And other things that are appearing.
I'd like to jump in on that real quick.
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to make a comment on that, and I'm sorry to do a pattern interrupt here, but I think it's important because we're talking about 5G here in this application, and now that we've got thousands of these very low orbit satellites that can shoot very high powered beams in the gigahertz range, and like you said, nobody can get out of this, or maybe very few people can get out of this. Now, I'm just going to do a LARP session here, folks. I'm going to do a live action role playing here, so I need to do a quick disclaimer. LARP session here. What if all these towers, because if you're getting hit with 30 gigahertz at 0.000000001 watt, it's probably not going to hurt you that bad. Okay, I'm just saying. Now, if you're getting hit with that same frequency at 1,000 watts or 100,000 watts, then I don't know what's going to happen. But that's what. So I'm just thinking, what if they decide to go underground for a day or for a week and just crank everything up full blast, and then decide, oh, okay, let's go back out, turn it back down, versus, nuclear bombs are going to have radioactive isotopes that are going to be scattered throughout the planet. So it'd just be a lot easier to clean up. So it's kind of something spooky to think about. What if a bunch of terrorists decide to hack into these things and use them as their own agenda? It's bad news. I'm just saying.
Once the infrastructure's in place that can broadcast, communicate this frequency band, then anything becomes possible. Obviously, one of the things, of course, with 5G is it doesn't travel well. Couple of things to that. That means you're going to have little boxes all the way down the street broadcasting this stuff, like outside children's bedrooms, etc. And the other thing, I don't know what's the story is in America. I can tell you what the story is in Britain. Fantastic numbers of mature trees in urban environments are being cut down here. In one city called Sheffield, thousands and thousands of mature urban trees with nothing wrong with them are being cut down. Why? Because mature urban trees are the worst nightmare for 5G, because it doesn't travel well. That's why they need the boxes broadcasting at very short intervals. And of course, these boxes are not going to broadcast millimeter wave frequencies at the level that will make you think your skin's on fire, because that's a much higher power level of this potential. But the potential to do that is there in the way that you describe. And of course, the effect on human health, the human mind, human emotions, human psychology, you're going to see a lot of people, if this is played out, who are going to start having mental and psychological problems. A lot of people are going to become electrically and electromagnetically sensitive, as many people have become in this technological world, but you're going to see massive increases of it. You're going to see repeating phenomena, which in the end people will not be able to deny has a common denominator cause. But the point is that once the infrastructure is in place, the technology is in place, they can turn it up as they choose, and it's cumulative too. The effect is cumulative. It's not that you have one dose; it's that you can't get away from it. You have the 5G in the home, you have the 5G in the street. You have the 5G coming from these, 20,000 satellites that they're putting up to beam it at every inch of the planet so no one can escape from it. This is an absolute technological control grid that is being constructed all around us every day. And these towers and the satellites and all the smart technology, of course, in your cars now, you have the Wi-Fi and the technology. They've just passed a law or started the process of passing a law in Europe that says, for instance, that after I think it's 2020, cars can't be sold in Europe unless they have the technology that stops people breaking speed limits. So the AI interacts with the speed limit broadcast in a particular stretch of road and won't let the car exceed it. What if you need to get somewhere fast for an emergency or something? Really explained. The point being that this technological grid is designed to control every area of human life and experience and choice and dictate that from afar. And with the playing out of it, the idea is that human freedom, as we've come to understand it, will not only be eroded, it will cease to exist. It's being eroded by the day, but the idea it ceases to exist. Now, what is necessary to appreciate the force, the mentality behind it, is to understand the scale of what is called evil that is involved here. You know, people find it hard to believe because they would not do something that no one else would do it. So we get, they would never do that. They would not only do that, they would not only are doing it, they would get off by doing it. Because just as you are, like I said earlier, have every potential for form, you have every potential human state of psychological perception. And one of those potentials is extreme, beyond comprehension, psychopathy. And if you look at the character traits of psychopaths, they have no empathy, they have no emotional consequence, no matter how much they make people suffer. They have no shame, they have no remorse, and doing and getting what they want is all that matters, and to hell with how that affects anyone else. Now, take that mentality we call a psychopath and multiply it 1,000 times, and you might get somewhere close to the mentality that's behind all this. So they would do that, and they are doing that, and they've been manipulating human society towards this all along. But that tells us something. If they had the power over us that allowed complete control just like that, it would already have happened. But they don't, because there is an indefinable maverick we call human consciousness and the potential of human consciousness. And the potential of that consciousness to perceive and to make decisions that are at odds with what is desired to control us. The idea of this technological level being brought down into human society now is to remove that maverick potential, human consciousness, and replace it with completely controlled and controllable AI, so that the end game is complete. And that's why we need to focus our attention immediately, without delay, on what the hell's going on, and not allow ourselves to be diverted into so many areas that are just there to hold our attention for long enough for this to play out and be implemented to the point of no return.
I'd like to interject on that. There was a famous quote, or there is a famous quote by Terence McKenna. I don't know how famous it is, but I certainly know of it. We are part of a symbiotic relationship with something which disguises itself as an extraterrestrial invasion so as not to alarm us. Now, he was definitely a psychonaut, and he did a lot of mind expansion, psychedelics, etc. So you have to take all of that with a grain of salt. And when I read this, I'm thinking, what in the world would be so scary that it would disguise itself as an extraterrestrial invasion so that we wouldn't be alarmed? Or it's just not that bright, or it's using that as a way to feed off of us and maximize results, maximize the energy that it consumes, etc. Now, I had a couple of great guests on the show yesterday, which I feel was a synchronistic moment of this simulated reality that it seems to me we are in. Doesn't mean it's not real. It's definitely real, but it seems to be like there's certain code, timelines, events that take place. And you've talked about this in many of your lectures. And I mean, you were talking about this before I was even thinking about it, I'm sure, about how things take place and people go, wow, that's seems like it's scripted. Well, maybe it's because they have to follow this plan in this machine. It's like, who's the controllers? Them, us, somebody else? Well, certainly if they have all this money and power and fame and fortune, yeah, but they have to be stuck on these certain rules. They have to do particular things. It's like they have less freedom oftentimes than other people do on the other side of the spectrum, where they don't have the money, they don't have the resources, but at least they can go out and run around and do what they want to do. I don't know. I'm just trying to put this together in the most light. Like, we have infinite opportunities, and we have the right to know what's really going on. But it seems like something has hijacked everything, almost, not everything, but mostly, and given us a false narrative. Where do we come from? Where do we go? What we're doing here, what certain products offer us. It's for your protection. That's why we do it, because we love you. Come on now. You're going to give us a seatbelt ticket for not wearing a seatbelt because it's for our protection, but it's okay to put genetically modified E. coli feces and stuff and not label it? I mean, really? That's for our protection? No, we know what's going on. And I think we're at a point now where, how do we maximize our potential? How do we reach the highest point? How do we break out of this matrix? And do we even want to? Do we, if we break, is it worse when we get out? I mean, what's outside? It's pretty wild. And yes, folks, I have a 5 head, so that's so I can think better. I shave my forehead so I can actually have more air in my brain. I just need to make that clear. That's a bad joke, but anyway. David's like, I'm out of here, man.
I'm concentrating on the mic, turning the mic on and off. Well, see, we talk about reptilians and different forms of extraterrestrial life, but it's just the same as what we are. Our infinite I is a state of consciousness. It has no form. It's a state of consciousness. It's a state of being aware. And the question is, how aware? Are you aware to little me, I have no power? Or are you aware to the point that I am all that is, has been, and ever can be? But these non-human entities are exactly the same. They are expressions of awareness taking form. So if you keep going back and keep going back and keep going back to the origin of all this, forget whether it's reptilian or gray or whatever, and just go back to its state of awareness. And what you're looking at is a very distorted state of awareness, which expresses itself in distorted behavior, distorted desires, distorted methods of manipulating others to its end. And what it wants to do, this distortion, is to distort everything it comes into contact with, so it absorbs that into its distortion. So the more, for instance, what is chaos, the manipulated chaos of the world, other than a distortion? What is all the conflict and the war other than a distortion? These are manifestations of this distortion of consciousness. And if we allow ourselves to get pulled in, then we start behaving like the distortion, because we become expressions of it. And if we do, we are adding power to that frequency vibratory distortional state that is controlling us. We're empowering it. When and it's operating within a band of frequency, and it's a very low band of frequency, and it's a very narrow band of frequency, because it's a distortion. It's because of that, it's very, very limited in its potential. When you start to re-self-identify from I am my labels, I am my name, my life story, my race, my religion, my income bracket, my culture, they're just experiences, transitory and brief. When you reevaluate self-identity, and you come from the perspective of I am the awareness having those experiences, I am not those experiences, those labels are not me, they are what I'm experiencing, and what I am is the experiencer, consciousness. That self-identity immediately expands your perception of self, perception of the world, perception of reality. And what that does, it starts to raise and expand your frequency. You start to beat to a different drum. That's why when people go into those states, they are no longer imprisoned within the frequency band of what I might call the distortion. They are now able to perceive and tap into awareness beyond it. So therefore they see they're no longer in the world and of it. They're in the world, but they're not of it. And this awakening to true self-identity not only allows you to perceive beyond the mind prison, it starts to challenge the distortion at the level of frequency, at the level of vibration. It starts to weaken it. It starts to unravel it. And this is why they have to keep people in low, limited, myopic perceptional states, because that is then reflected in their vibrational frequency state, which holds them in the matrix, if you like. And the answer, the way forward, is not stockpiling weapons and fighting the enemy, which is just feeding the enemy if you break it down to the level of vibration and frequency. It's empowering the enemy because you are playing in the stadium of the enemy, of hate and hostility and conflict and death and destruction. If we can, as a human race, start to put down the labels, stop identifying with them, enjoy them, but know their experiences, not you, and start to self-identify the true I, this collective vibrational impact will break down and make impotent these forces of distortion and what you might call evil, which are behind this global control. That's the way forward for me, because you solve problems by withdrawing the cause of the problem, not by running around trying to find a solution which leads to another problem, but by removing the cause of the problem. And the basic cause of the problem, apart from the full-on manipulation, is that humanity has fallen for the perceptual trick, the perceptual hijack. So it perceives itself in certain terms, so its vibrational state reflects those perceptions of self and the world. And thus, we spend our time, if you like, vibrating within the walls of the prison. So all the information we receive, all the perceptions we receive, come from within the walls of the prison, which again is why when people start to expand towards greater self, breach the walls of the prison, the perceptual walls of the prison, the information walls of the prison, and start to perceive, therefore, the world in a different way, that's why those people still in the perceptual Alcatraz see them as crazy and mad and dangerous, because they literally can't compute what those people are computing because they're not on the same frequency. So the answer is, and it may sound trite, it may sound simplistic, but then all genius is simple and all truth is at the end simple. But it's a transformation of human self-identity and all the vibrational implications that come from that, that will bring this matrix down. That's what I'm working towards. Not just exposing the way it works, which is essential information, because people have to hear information that they can deem credible before they start to accept the nature of their plight, what this reality is, and then we can start doing something about it. People don't do anything about something they don't realize is going on. So the fact that something's going on and this is how it works is essential, but it ain't going to provide the answer. The answer is the next stage, which is from that knowledge of the hoax to realize that reality is not like we've been told it is. And by reevaluating our sense of reality and our self-identity, we will together create a vibrational transformation, a vibrational, potentially tidal wave that will break up the energetic informational construct on which this fake reality is founded.
And yeah, that's getting deep. And I like how you're using ideas for solutions in a positive light. And, you know, how do we as a species break out of these dark ecstasy bondage or binds, whatever. I mean, this is really spooky stuff, folks. But as far as us having an opportunity to do something about it, every single day we wake up, every single time we have a thought, we can change the world. Just that thought. I mean, thoughts are priceless. And thinking, the divine spark that we have that's been given to us, let's use it instead of thinking there's nothing we can do. We don't have a choice. Let's just, let's be good little sheep and work until we die and pay for our funeral because they love us so much. Now, I would like to say that I went back and watched an interview of yours where you were talking about some information from Credo Mutwa. And very intelligent man. I think he's in South Africa somewhere, a shaman. He's a Zulu shaman, correct? And okay, so he was talking about how at one point we were one being. We weren't male and female. We were one being. And then these space people came and they offered us a choice to go into the left tunnel or the right tunnel. One was blue, one was red or something like that. And that's what separated us. And then they genetically tampered us. So if that was the case, I'm thinking to myself, if I'm going to genetically alter an entire species on a planet, when would the best time to do it be? When there's a major cataclysm and most of the life is wiped out. So I don't know if they waited for that event to happen. They came down and manipulated us. But did they put some type of code when they genetically manipulated us that allows them to like see through our eyes, hear what we're thinking about, I mean, hear what we're hearing, think about our thoughts, etc. Like we're drones, literally drones for them. And I think you've talked about it in the vibrational standpoint, but let's take it back to that point and bring all this together in the best way possible.
Well, see, that's another point that, I've not come to these conclusions about extraterrestrial manipulation of human society going way back by pulling it out of the ether. I've done 30 years of research in, 50, 60 countries. And what you find is that whether it's religious texts like Sons of God and Daughters of Men and what have you, or whether it's the Zulus of South Africa or the Aboriginals of Australia and all these different ancient cultures, the theme is constant of an extraterrestrial, non-human intervention in human affairs, which changed the direction of human society. Then, over the years, as I've spoken with, if you like, insiders and whistleblowers in America and Europe and other places today, who tell me the same story from a modern perspective, and that it's still going on. Obviously, this is not just some nutter sitting in a darkened room, smoking weed or something and coming to these conclusions. This is hard research and multiply confirmed sources of the same story. And, the common theme is that there was an intervention, there was genetic manipulation, and that basically they've turned humanity into, well, how appropriate, like a flock of sheep, like an animal farm, not the Book of Orwell, of course. And while we stay in perceptual and consciousness states of basically slumber, then we'll go on thinking we're experiencing a certain reality while that reality is completely controlled. I mean, how did Aldous Huxley know when he wrote Brave New World in 1932 about all the genetic and drug manipulation and technology that we have now? How did George Orwell know about telescreens? How did he know about what are now smart TVs? How did another guy that another insider that I quote in my books, say in 1969 or describe in 1969 the internet? 1969. How did he do that? Because there are two worlds. There is the world that we experience and we think is the real world, and then there's the world that the control system lives in, and that is a very different world, A, in terms of its timeline, and B, in terms of its level of knowledge. So it may sound incredible. I don't really care if it does. What's happening is incredible. All this smart technology now, and all this technology that's being brought in, all this 5G and stuff that has come in so fast, was available and known about thousands of years ago by this non-human force. But of course, you have to bring your target population up to a intellectual level of knowledge to the point where they can work with that technology and thus build their own prison. It's no good, giving computers to Stone Age man or smartphones. Not gonna work. So what's happened is systematically in this farm, humanity has been brought along a path to make us intellectually clever enough to build our own technological prison while thinking it's technological progress, but not wise enough, not consciousness expanded enough to see that that's what we're doing. And that's what's happening. And what is happening is this technology has been played out in a systematic order as humanity has been able to work with it. And as human technological knowledge increases and can understand more and more of the technological details, so this technology has been played out quicker and quicker and quicker, because it's coming out of the underground bases where the major ones, they interact with this non-human race in the lower levels of these very, very deep, what they call DUMBs, deep underground military bases. And this technology has been there, the potential for it anyway, has been there for a long, 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 long time. And so it's coming out, and you have the cover stories. I watched a couple of BBC documentaries. They weren't very enlightening because it was the BBC, but there was one or two interesting things in it. They were documentaries about Silicon Valley, the devil's playground, as I call it. And they had this sequence where they showed a series of garage doors. And they said, behind this garage door, so-and-so was discovered and developed, and so-and-so, then another garage door. You know, it's like someone must have said after that documentary, hey, you know, too many garage door cover stories, fellas. You know, we've got to be a bit more inventive with the cover story. You know, enough of the garage doors. Because a lot of these, I'm not saying all of them, but a lot of these technological advances have a cover story about how they came into the public arena that is not the way they came into the public arena and not where they originated. They originated somewhere else in the military. And so this twofold process of developing humanity intellectually, but not spiritually and not in terms of consciousness expansion, to the point where we can build our own technological prison, which is what's happening now, has been done over a period of time to bring us to this point. You know, it is like Animal Farm, and it is a plantation, if you like. But it's a plantation as long as the herd of the plantation stays asleep. And human consciousness has the potential to expand to infinity. It's what this technological stuff is designed to suppress and snuff out. They've not done it yet. We have the potential to break out of the herd, to break out of the herd mentality, to break out of the ability for a tiny band of frequency and that which manipulates that frequency to control our thoughts, to control our perceptions, and control our lives. It's there. And the doors are closing, yes, but it's still there for us to go in another direction. And we better do it pretty damn quick, because the door is closing, and it's closing fast.
I'm going to ask you about the genetic manipulation that seems to be a project that's been going on for thousands of years. Now, I've read through the Nag Hammadi scriptures, and I think you actually wrote about Yaldabaoth in the Secret Book of John recently, and you talked about the Archons. In the Secret Book of John, that ancient text that was almost completely destroyed, we're fortunate to have a copy. The church attempted to get rid of anything that didn't correlate with its attempt to show the world that there is a monotheistic God, and you have to follow their rules or else you're the devil. Basically, in my opinion, is the way that they project things. But they destroyed so many documents, so much literature, so many scriptures and ancient teachings, but fortunately we have access to the Nag Hammadi scriptures. And if you read the secret book of John, it talks about how Yaldabaoth was created, and then Yaldabaoth created Adam with 365 demons and angels. And I think the 365 has got to have some connection to that many days in the year. I think there's a lot of astrotheology and time aspects and multifaceted. But when it talks about the creation of Adam, they at first they created the body, but it didn't come alive. And then Yaldabaoth blew life into Adam, but it took his spark. So they spent years and years and years attempting to suppress Adam and manipulate him. So I wonder what your thoughts are on the aspect of there being possibly two different humans, one that doesn't have that same energy source, and one that does. And maybe Yaldabaoth, could Yaldabaoth be Enki, and could Enki be an ancient geneticist that had very powerful resources that we looked at like a god, but was really just a being with amazing genetics and technologies?
Well, you could speculate forever about was he, or was that they, or whatever. But I think we're in a time when we need to gather together the basic themes of what we know and start responding from that, rather than trying to work out fine detail. It's interesting, it's very interesting, but we are in quite a simple situation, really. Our perceptual consciousness state is being systematically suppressed and contracted to hold us in a band of frequency which allows our perceptions and thus our reality to be controlled. We break out of that frequency firewall, and our potential is as infinite as we want to make it, and that potential itself will bring an end to the control system, which we are actually holding together. See, when you're vibrating within a certain frequency band, anything in that frequency band is being empowered by what you're giving out, because you are literally a broadcaster of that frequency, which holds that structure together, that reality together. And therefore, when we are in these low vibrational states, we are actually feeding the matrix. We're empowering it, we're strengthening it. When you break out of them and you go into expanded perceptual states, expanded self-identity states, you start to do the opposite. You start to undermine and weaken the power of the construct. And it starts to, you start to see the matrix, if you like, losing its power. And as it loses its power, more and more people start to see the world. They don't know why, but they start to see the world differently, start to see themselves differently. And a momentum starts. And it's in the level of perceptual state that this control system will reach its goal, or this control system will be dismantled and unraveled. And this is the area I think people need to focus upon. There is, whatever form it may take in detail, there is a malevolent force that is seeking to enslave human society by enslaving human perception. And that's great news in a way, because we are in control of our perceptions. We can break out into other perceptual states whenever we choose. People are doing it. People are doing it like never before, certainly in modern times. I see it all over the world. So there are many, many positive things happening as well. See, because you don't see positive things on the television news, it seems that the world is only going one way, but it's actually going another way as well, though it's, not as obvious. But right. I see it in the world. There is, when I look back 30 years at what it was like talking about the stuff that I do, it was just wall-to-wall ridicule. It was wall-to-wall dismissal. It's not anymore. Things are changing. But, you know, I see people in the alternative media who are only looking at what's happening from the level of the five senses, who can only see some politician coming in like Trump. That's why so many in the alternative media jumped on Trump, because if you don't see these deeper esoteric ways of dealing with the problem at foundation, which is consciousness states, then all you can see as a solution are electing the right politician, electing the right president, stockpiling weapons to fight the enemy. And all that's doing is feeding the enemy, or what is perceived as the enemy, because the idea that Donald Trump was going to be allowed to come to power when he could have been stopped quite easily very early on. I mean, he had to beat something like 16 other Republican candidates that started out to get the nomination. The idea that he came to power by accident and not by design is ridiculous. And, you know, I see people in the alternative media over the years who've said it's all a fix and the presidents are all puppets. All of that is true. But then because one of them tells them what they want to hear in the election campaign, they go all over, you know, in love and lose the perspective that presidents are puppets. That's why they're there, including Trump. You know, that's what happens. That's where you look for solutions when you don't realize the nature of reality and the foundation of where all this is coming from. When you do, you can see how you can change it. And it's not by stockpiling weapons or electing Trump. It's by seeing all that as a diversion. The real focus needs to be on how do we change ourselves? How do we start operating on a different vibrational level, so that instead of feeding and empowering the matrix construct, we start to undermine it and dilute it and weaken it, which is what happens and what will be happening with all these people around the world who are starting to beat to a different drum.
Well, some people think President Trump is a time traveler. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. You got to have a little fun, right? Because why so serious unless you're from Sirius? And we have the opportunity to make our own decisions. And I love what you just said, David. We can be the change. Be the change you want to see, folks. I say that all the time because it is so true. Do you want to see something different? Well, what are you going to do about it? Are you going to complain about it? That's cool. Yeah, it always starts with something. But are you going to come up with a solution? And, you know, David right now is talking about positive solutions, things that anybody can do. Like if you want to change something, first of all, you got to change your mindset. You got to change your perception. What is your perception about reality? Now, I feel personally that we're in a dualistic reality. Every action has an opposite and equal reaction, at least in this simulated matrix that we're in. And at the quantum level, it's all connected. So we can choose which side we want to play on. We can pick the side. Do you want to be good? Do you want to be bad? It's your choice. My conscience says, hey, let's pick the good side. Let's do the right things. I don't need a God to tell me what's right. I don't need a book to tell me what's right. I don't need a God to tell me what's wrong. I know for myself. And I think that we all have that innate within ourselves. I shouldn't say all of us. No, I take that back. I think that most of us have that. But then there are those people that have no conscience or lack of conscience. So I can't judge them. They can't even judge themselves. I can protect myself, at least hopefully I can protect myself from them. But it's a very interesting reality that we're in. And I think that right now, with so many people around the world thinking, hey, there's something going on, something doesn't feel right, they're starting to pick up on it, these mysteries are being unveiled. And people are either accepting it or they're keeping their head in the sand, and that's totally their right too. Not everybody wants to wake up. Remember when what's his name said, "Hey, plug me back into the Matrix. I want to eat this steak. I know it's not real, but it tastes so freaking good. I don't care." We've got a few questions from the audience, and I know we've gone a little bit longer than I said we were going to originally. Would you mind answering a couple of questions or taking a few questions from the audience? I know you're extremely busy, so, and you're still on.
There you go.
There we go.
Turn the mic on and off. Yeah, I'll take a couple of questions. Yeah,
Okay.
No problem.
Fantastic. The first question is, what is your take on the Samvartika fire, the Samvartika fire, the Ascension, and the 22-strand DNA ignition? I don't know anything about that. So,
well, I mean, that there is a belief that, and I certainly would not dismiss it for a second, that the two-stranded DNA we have now was much more multi-stranded before the genetic manipulation. And that would certainly make sense because of what I said earlier. DNA is a receiver transmitter of information. You know, if you had more transmitter receivers operating on a bigger range of frequency, your perceptual range potential would be dramatically expanded. And whether that is how it happened in detail, I would say the theme is absolutely right. As I mentioned earlier, that there has been genetic tinkering which has dramatically reduced the range of perception that is available to us in this world. When I first came across, a long time ago now, the fact that we can only see this tiny, ludicrously small range of frequency visible light, my first reaction is, that's insane. Why is that? And then the more that I researched and uncovered this whole historic background and the genetic manipulation, it became obvious to me that it's by design. And who knows? I mean, as consciousness expands, in many ways, it's like if you don't use a muscle, it withers away. Well, if you only focusing attention on a certain tiny band of frequency, well, you know, other connections to more expanded realms and realities might also wither away and just cease to be operational, if you like. And the more that we expand our awareness, maybe these other antennae would start to be reawakened and remanifested, because, you know, in the end, you know, the body is a hologram. It's not physical. It's a hologram. It's like a projection of waveform information, just like the screen of the computer is a projection from Wi-Fi waveform information. And of course, the information on the screen, which has been decoded from the Wi-Fi field, is completely different to the Wi-Fi field. In the same way that as we decode this world, indeed decode our own bodies, which in their base form are also waveform information fields, we are taking the waveform information and we are decoding it, like the computer, into a very different state on our screen in here. And as we expand our awareness, well, there's a very good chance that these other levels of interaction with a more expanded reality, which have been, if you like, have gone to sleep through lack of use, will be reawakened, and we'll start to see that what we call DNA is a tiny fraction of what it potentially could be, and what I think was at one point.
Yeah, the DNA is incredible. It's a key to something. And, you know, when you talked about the bloodlines, these positions of power having specific bloodlines and staying within other bloodlines, it makes sense, because if it's all code, or if it acts as code and as a key to another realm, then they can control the narrative. How do you control the narrative? We can go all the way back to the Sumerian king list, which goes back hundreds of thousands of years, and the first kingship was descended from the heavens. So what's your take on that, folks? You can be the judge, but it does talk about these lifespans and these kingship rules of thousands of years before these catastrophic floods. And there's been multiple catastrophic floods. But when you talk about the Anunnaki, are the Anunnaki and the serpent seed, are they one another the same? Because these Babylonian stories, these ancient Sumerian tablets that have been rewritten and put in the Bible, and then they attempt to make it a monotheistic God. No wonder God has so many personalities, because they're talking about a multitude of gods, folks. It's like, wait, one day he's happy, the next day he's pissed off. What's going on? He seems to get so upset here. But anyway, I'm divagating for a minute. But also in these Sumerian tablets, David, there's this one that's called, and this is an Oxford translated ancient Sumerian cuneiform tablet. It's called Lugalbanda and the Anzu bird. And the Anzu bird is described as a dragon. And the Anzu bird actually scares the Anuna gods so much when it screams that they go hide in crevices like ants. It specifically says that. So do you think the dragons were real? I do.
Well, anything's possible, because of the reasons that I've talked about earlier. You know, our perceptions of reality are defined by our currently experienced reality. That doesn't mean it was always like that, and it certainly wasn't. But if you look at the correlation between serpent gods and royalty, for instance, it's absolutely in your face. The ancient Chinese emperors used to claim the right to be emperor because of their genetic descendants from the serpent gods. You see the symbolic correlation and connection between royalty and the dragon or the snake. You talk to Zulu shaman like Credo Mutwa, and he talks about the Chitahuri, the children of the serpent. You look at Central American myths and accounts, and they talk about the serpent gods. I mean, you know, it's so, I mean, I haven't come to these conclusions, you know, on the back of a matchbox. The evidence, if you put it together, is absolutely enormous. I mean, they've got, you know, books galore here full of it that I've written. And this whole royalty, I mean, why do we have royalty? Why did royalty exist? Why did aristocracy exist? Because they claimed their bloodline was different. Why do we call them blue bloods? Why was these particular lines considered the right to rule, the divine right to rule? It's interesting, when you go back to the origin of the word divine, you go back to diva, supernatural being. And these are the bloodlines of supernatural beings. They have a dual DNA, a dual information receiving transmitting system. Part of it is that which created them, and part of it is human. And we see the human expression of that, because if we didn't, we'd realize what was going on. But behind that human genetics is another genetics. These are hybrids. And this is where the whole concept of royalty and demigods came from. And when there was this transition from rule by royalty, by inherited royalty, to what we call politics and democracy, the bloodlines didn't go away. They just took off their crowns and coronets and put on business suits. And these bloodlines that control the banking system, the major corporations, the global media, governments, finance, and all the rest of it, they perceive themselves today as, if you like, royalty, the bloodlines of the gods, every bit as much as overt royalty ever did. And they interbreed with each other because they are seeking to hold this genetic code, this hybrid code. This is why royalty used to interbreed with each other and still does, and why the Eastern establishment families of the United States invariably interbreed with each other, because they are holding this genetic code. And a lot of these people will marry for genetics and then have their relationships they really want to have, unofficially. And the marriages of genetics are to produce the children of the next generation with that genetics. And it goes even deeper than that. As I've explained in the books and quoted insiders who've talked to me about this, they have sperm banks around the world where these bloodlines, their genetics is artificially impregnated into people, women around the world, and they then give birth to children who grow up under different names. They're not called the classic names of the families, they're called other names. And these people then come to power in banking or politics, become president maybe. And because they're all called different names, people think that they are random people who just ended up as president or CEO of this company. When in fact, although they have different names, they're the same bloodline. The same bloodline as the major families of the cabal. And so these hybrid children are all over the place. This is how systematically it's done, because the genetics matter. They must not have that genetic code diluted by interbreeding outside of itself. This is where the blue blood interbreeding comes from, and keeping the genes up and all this stuff. This is what it's about. It's about holding this genetic code. Why? Because the code is a receiver transmitter system, and the nature of the code dictates the range of frequencies and what frequencies it will interact with and receive and transmit with. And if the genetic code changes by interbreeding with the wider population, then that receiver transmission system changes. What it tunes into and can and cannot tune into changes. So this is why they're desperate to not allow their genetics to be diluted by interbreeding outside of itself. This is what all this blue blood, royal interbreeding, etc., has been all about.
I would like to add something to that. There is, I'll wait for you to hit the mute button just because that echoing. Thank you, sir. There is a very good friend of mine that is extremely well versed in Vedic astrology. And you give her your birth date with the date and the time and the location, and she will tell you stuff about you that you'll be like, okay, do you work for the CIA? I mean, how do you know all this about me? And she's like, well, I could do it. She's that good. And to make a long story short, we've also talked about this possibility of these elite bloodlines having specific, having their children at particular times and particular locations, because it seems as if the universe, if we're going to look at it as a galactic computer, let's look at this as a computer in a sense, the stars and the planets act like nodes of information. So the location that you're born at and the time that you're born has a huge impact on your life path. So do you think the MFers have gotten this to a science to where they can actually say, okay, if this person is born at time X at location Y, then we're going to get Z, which is exactly what we want. Like they can reincarnate as through time and space in the particular bloodlines to maintain control?
Well, first of all, there has to be a common theme throughout what we call history, where people have come and gone, and in the middle they have advanced this agenda of human control, knowing that they weren't going to see it come to fruition, or would seem that way. There has to be a common theme that spans all these people coming in and out, in and out, in and out through the generations, who will push this agenda on through the generations, so to present day. So clearly there is another force. It's not just happening in this reality. It's not just people sitting around a table. But I learned long ago that people like CEOs and I've known a few astrologers over the years, and they've told me some of their clientele, not by name, because that would not be ethical, but by position, by job. And they are people who you would think would laugh at astrology, that would laugh at esoterics. But they don't. They take it deadly, deadly seriously, because they understand it works, because they understand the reality energetic basis on which it works. And if you look at the human body, it's a vehicle for consciousness, and the consciousness working through the body impacts upon the world around it. Well, what is a planet, a star, other than another form of consciousness within another form, experiencing in another form, because everything is consciousness. And we live in this sea of consciousness, which is a sea of information, potential and probability and possibility. So as these points of attention, these points of information, we call planets and stars, are moving through their cycles, they are impacting upon the greater field their information, their particular perspective, their particular contribution of information. And when you get certain kind of conjunctions, trines, what astrologers talk about, sequences of planets, their total contribution together and their impact on the field is far, far greater than their individual parts. So there are certain astronomical sequences which impact changes, vibrational and informational, upon the field much greater than others in the normal course of astronomical movements. And we, as energetic consciousness, electromagnetic on one level beings, are interacting with that field. Thus, we are affecting it and it is affecting us. So anything that changes that field at any point is going to impact on our field. And this is why when you get back down into the fine detail, not the astrological, horoscope readings in a newspaper, but you get deep, deep into the science of it, you can project and understand the way that certain astrological sequences impact upon the field, which then impact on humanity. And depending on your own vibrational consciousness, informational state, it dictates how much you are impacted by certain changes in the field against other changes in the field. And when we come into this world, we pick up, as part of our energetic makeup, the field as it was when we entered this reality. Some say it's a conception. I wouldn't rule that out either. And so as you go through your cycle of life, because of that, I'll call it astronomical, astrological information part of your field picked up at birth or conception, you are going to interact with the changing field in a different way, and it's going to impact upon you in a different way to someone who came into the world at a different point in the cycle and thus inherited a different nature of the field at that time. And that's, for me, the basic foundation of how astrological changes affect us and affect some people at certain times of the year as against others. This is why, again, you see these correlations of people that have aptitudes of various types, gifts of certain types, abilities of certain types, who go into roles of certain types, who tend to be often born in the same astrological period. Okay, I'll turn you on, as they say.
I've heard that saying before, that billionaires care about astrology, not millionaires, or that, you know, billionaires have personal astrologers, not millionaires. That's very interesting, and I appreciate you you talking about that. And I guess we'll just go with a couple more questions, and then, folks, we're going to have to let the man, the legend, Mr. David Icke go. He's extremely busy, but hopefully we can get him back on the program again sometime. What do you think about Tesla and his thoughts on frequency, vibration, energy? It's a great question.
I think Tesla was spot on. I think Tesla was ahead of his time. I say ahead of his time. He was obviously tapping into something out there beyond the program that was giving him this insight. And if Tesla technology was used for the benefit of humanity rather than the control of humanity, we would be in a situation now where we'd have free energy, where so many ills of the world, environmental problems of the world would be sorted out, and sorted out relatively quickly. But what has happened is, because all knowledge has multiple applications, you can use a microphone to spread manipulation, or you can use a microphone to spread truth. The microphone is neutral, and knowledge is neutral. It just is. It's how you use it. And a lot of this 5G, or smart technology, smart grid technology, is actually Tesla technology, and they would have found it out themselves because of the reasons I'm talking about. But he'd sussed it. And there's an interesting thing about Tesla, is that when he died virtually penniless in a New York hotel room in 1943, the authorities took his work and went through it in great detail. And the man who was designated to do that was a man called John Trump. And that's the J in Donald J. Trump. So again, the idea that Trump is a maverick that came out of nowhere is just ridiculous. He's just part of another part of this whole network of manipulation. He's just another, well, he's a puppet, but he's not an off the street puppet and a maverick puppet. He's someone who also locks into this into this network. This is why he has got himself into such catastrophic financial trouble over the years. And somehow money appears out of nowhere to get him out of trouble. But yeah, that's an interesting kind of connection to Tesla. But he was a man ahead of his time who foresaw the misuse of what he understood. And he was not wrong about that. It's certainly been misused. And one of the applications of it is energy technology, where they just fire a frequency instead of a weapon. The frequency itself, the directed energy weapon, becomes the weapon itself. And I think there's a lot of more of that going on, which is blamed on natural phenomena than people realize.
Well, at least he's not a politician. I would much rather have an actor than somebody that's been in politics their whole life. And I got to say, man, I don't know if you've read the book about, what is it, Baron Trump's time travels. Very interesting. Very interesting. I'm telling you, folks, we're in the Matrix. It's a simulation. And David, you have so much knowledge, so much information. I've asked myself this, and other people have asked me this before. I mean, do you ever like wake up and then you look out the window and there's, a dozen black Suburbans with, a couple of black helicopters that are silent hanging out over your house? Or was that 20 years ago and now they're just like, okay, the cat's out of the bag, let's let him go?
How do I say this without sounding arrogant? I'm not meaning to. I'm just telling it from where I'm coming from. I've never been, I've never knowingly had black sedans or white vans or black helicopters in any way in my life. I've never been threatened. The weapon of choice to discredit me has been ridicule and condemnation and demonization. But I mean, they must be intelligent enough to realize that if they did threaten me, I would just run at them faster and shout even louder. But there's another aspect to this, which is they cannot stop me. They cannot take me out. They cannot do these things. They can manipulate what they control, like the means of communication, which they have constructed, and they can shut me out of those because they have the power to do that because it's their communication system. But they can't take me out because when you tap in to certain levels of awareness, and anyone can do it, it's a matter of allowing it to happen. It's a natural state that we should be in. Then you are no longer in their frequency layer. And if they cannot, because this world is a holographic expression of states of consciousness which manifest as states of frequency, if you are in a different band of frequency at that energetic level to what they're in, they cannot make a connection to you. And if they can't make a connection at the energetic level, they can't make a connection here because this is just a projection of the energetic level, if I'm making any sense. And therefore, once you disconnect from their frequency range, they cannot make a connection to you at that level, so they can't make a connection to you here. what the world that we're experiencing, which is this real world, apparently physical world. It's only like a movie screen. By the time the movie hits the screen in the cinema, it's a done deal. All the scenes have been shot, all the scenes have been edited, all the titles have been put in, and by the time it hits the screen, it's a done deal. And by the time the reality we experience in this reality happens, it's a done deal. How it comes to happens on the energetic level of consciousness and frequency. That's where this manifests from. And they have to make a connection to you there to make a connection to you here, because one's a projection of the other. You can't change what's projected on a movie screen. You have to go and change where it's being projected from. And so because of that, because I'm not in their band of frequency on that level for where reality is projected from, they can't take me out here. They can't make that connection. They can't do it. They can, like I say, they can make life difficult by controlling what they control, like methods of communication. They can't take me out. Can't do it. And that's where I'm coming from. And I will leave this world when I choose to leave it, and not when they do. End of frickin' story. Finito.
That's what I'm talking about. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that you have so many more questions, and the questions that you have, you can actually find on David's website and on his YouTube channel. He has some excellent YouTube videos. Go to David Icke's YouTube channel. I've got the link in the video description box. Also check it out, davidicke.com. And if you want to get into the real detailed stuff, read his books. It'll blow your mind. You'll probably never be the same again, because you'll have this mind expansion process. I will say this: if you are religious and you read maybe The Biggest Secret or Infinite Love is the Only Truth, Everything Else is Illusion, I think that that would probably be definitely a happier read. It will be very difficult. Let's just put it that way. So be warned, if you are happy in your little box and you don't want to go out of it. I just wanted to throw that disclaimer out there, because your work is really mind-shattering and paradigm-shattering. David, it was a real honor to speak with you. Thank you so much for coming on the program. I've been wanting to speak with you for years. I read your book 13 years ago, The Biggest Secret, and it completely blew my mind, and things have never been the same. So may the force be with you. Be safe, and thank you. And dang it, you're on mute. There we go.
Now, yeah, thanks very much, mate. I've enjoyed it. Probably the best book to read at the moment is the last one, the current one, Everything You Need to Know But Have Never Been Told, which pulls the whole thing together. And I've literally about 2 weeks from finishing a new book, which is so explosive. Those in power will have to take to their beds. So watch for that later in the year.
I certainly will be, and I'm hoping for an autographed copy. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for being here with us. You just witnessed history in the making. Be the change you want to see.